afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Need to have order in the room. Thank you very much. And welcome. Welcome to this hearing of the Budget and Finance Committee. Today is Monday, June 26, 2017, and we have a full contingent of members here ready to begin work. And we are also joined by Councilmember O'Farrell, who we'll be hearing from momentarily. But members, before we do anything else, I would like to propose items 4, 5, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 for consent approval. And to that, I would like to also add our closed session items 2 and 3 for consent approval, unless there are concerns or questions about any of those matters.
Nope.
You know, it's not even a long question. It's fine for consent, but on 3, if we end up doing any settlement, do we have a chance to recoup attorney fees on that? Do you know, on 3? That was the current county.
I don't know, but we can...
We can find out later. I can
Yeah,
find out offline.
I'd appreciate it, yeah.
No problem.
Because otherwise...
I'm good.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so any other questions or concerns? So we also have no cards on any of those matters. So items 2 and 3 will receive and file item 2, and item 3, approve the city attorney's recommendation. Item 4 is approved. Item 5 is approved. Item 8 is noted and filed. Item 9 is approved. Item 10 is approved. Item 11 is approved. And 12 and 13 are approved. So that will be the action of the committee. And that will then bring us to item number, we're going to, in light of the fact that Mr. O'Farrell is here, we're going to go ahead and take up his item, which is item number 14.
Pardon me, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
For item number 1, the disposition you would like.
I'm sorry?
Would you like to continue item number 1? We understand that the city attorney...
Oh, yes, I would indeed. Yes, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Item number 1 will be continued. All right, Mr. O'Farrell, can I invite you to the table, please? And do we have a chair for Mr. O'Farrell? Okay, good. Yeah.
Item 14 is motion O'Farrell-Koretz-Bonin relative to a request to the Office of Finance to report on options for divestment from all holdings with Wells Fargo Bank, and the finance report on the status of the city's depository banking request for proposals process.
All right. Good afternoon, Mr. O'Farrell.
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, colleagues in the Budget and Finance Committee, for hearing this item today. Really important, and has gotten a lot of attention. A lot of passions have been flared because of recent history with the practices of Wells Fargo Bank. I'd like to give the committee a brief history of the Wells Fargo activity in terms of how it's harmed Los Angeles residents. And just what I would encourage you to do is remember the following. Under the Community and Reinvestment Act, regulators have been researching Wells Fargo activity since 2009. Under the Community Reinvestment Act, a federal agency, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency is charged with oversight of banking and investment institutions. In 2015, our city attorney, Mike Fewer, filed suit against Wells Fargo for their harm to the residents of Los Angeles. This resulted in a settlement that resulted in the following. It was a $50 million settlement, the largest in Los Angeles history. Independent third party hired by Wells Fargo to identify unauthorized activity in Los Angeles. Any customer harmed past $1 in losses gets access to reimbursement of damages and any fees thereof. The settlement also allows customers to individually pursue legal action against Wells Fargo if needed. I commend the city attorney on the settlement that was reached. The City of Los Angeles has been a leader in keeping Wells Fargo and other banking institutions honest. Although Wells Fargo Bank has at times been a great partner, it is nonetheless our responsibility to provide oversight. And when I say great partner, they have an incredible charitable giving arm. I've worked with them for years on community matters in the 13th District, but this does not forgive or I think, make neutral the harm that has been done by their recent fraudulent practices. What is the purpose of this motion? The motion outlines the role of City Treasurer and Office of Finance. This department has the fiduciary responsibility under Charter and State Constitution to act responsibly with all funds deposited in the City Treasury. My motion, signed on with our colleagues Paul Koretz and Mike Bonin, directed the Office of Finance to report back with options for divestment and an update on the City General Banking Services. Recent stories in the LA Times of the focus of Wells Fargo as an institution and their business practices has forced us to act. Los Angeles Times stories include a focus on targeting minorities, undocumented immigrants, and Native Americans. The new instructions. So I want to thank you again for hearing this item and for considering the following recommendations that I ask for today. I respectfully request that the Budget and Finance Committee instruct the Office of Finance to develop a new RFP for the City General Banking Services contract, consistent with the Community Reinvestment Act ratings, the Responsible Banking Ordinance, and any recent regulatory enforcement actions for banking and investment institutions. Further, I ask that the committee instruct the Office of Finance to report on the impacts of suspending investment activities and broker actions with Wells Fargo until it improves its Community Reinvestment Act ratings. Finally, I ask that you request the Office of the City Attorney to report on current and continued business with Wells Fargo on the basis of the Community Reinvestment Act score for any further potential penalties or future contracts. I don't need to tell any of you how complicated and intricate these accounts and relationships with all of our banking institutions are, but I am confident that once we get these reports back, it will inform us a way forward to, I think, basically demand that any banking institution that the city does business with does so with integrity and without risk to fraudulent activity for those who can least afford it. I want to thank Paul Koretz and Mike Bonin for working with me on this motion. I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for working closely with our office. Your staff has been amazing on this motion and instructions back in March. City Attorney, again, Mike Fewer, for his relentless efforts on behalf of Angelenos. Special shout out for the Office of Finance. I want to thank the Los Angeles City County Native American Commission for their assistance and their help, specifically Rudy Ortega, the chair, Chrissy Castro, the vice chair, and members of the commission. We have so many supporters in this room, advocates who are very passionate, understandably passionate about this issue, and I want to thank all of the advocates who have been supportive of this process. A process that began late last year as part of our 2016 Native American Heritage Month celebration and the Dakota Access Pipeline resolution that I introduced last September, and we ratified with unanimous council action the following month in October. We're in a new era where we can't just look the other way, nor can we wring our hands when things like this happen. But we have to demand integrity and honesty and fair business practices in the city of Los Angeles. And that's what I hope we'll have a good discussion about today in this committee. And I thank you so much for your time.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mr. O'Farrell, and thank you for your work. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. O'Farrell. And so, folks, there are a lot of cards here, and there are three somewhat related matters on our agenda today, number 7, 14, and 15. So what I'd like to do is call people up to speak on those matters together, and when we have multiple related items, we provide 2 minutes, which you can then mix and match however you would like among those items. So usually we only take 1 minute per speaker, but with multiple items we give 2 minutes. So I do want to just begin this discussion among us by saying there will be people with differing views on this. I would just ask that everyone be respectful of the viewpoints that are presented, and even when it comes to clapping for people that you agree with, while the signs are helpful to show your support of that person, if we applaud after every speaker, it's going to take much longer to get through all the cards. So I would just ask that we try to just give the people at the microphone the respect and attention that they deserve in offering their comments. Should we just go in with public comment, or is there any reason to? Okay, so let's go ahead and start. Unless Mr. Bonner, did you want? Okay. All right. So for items 7, 14, and 15, we'll take, for public comment, we'll take those items up together. And our first speaker will be Irene Opinaldo, followed by Keith Anthony Sicona, I'm sorry. Followed by Shannon Rivers. Good afternoon.
Afternoon. Blessings, all of you. I, Irene Opinaldo, a member of ACE and Committee for Better Banks, experienced how Wells Fargo set me up to lose my home with 3 insurances, which I had never had in 60 years living there. As I became more involved, I heard and saw from workers how Wells Fargo forced workers to commit fraud on 3 million customers and blamed the low-wage workers for the fraud. And I knew why for 18 months Wells Fargo would never address my concern about 3 insurances. Wells Fargo funds dirty pipelines on indigenous land to destroy life and environment for their benefit. I'm asking LA City Council to pass this ordinance and divest from this toxic bank who is still committing fraud, abusing workers, and stealing homes in communities to create more homeless like I am now. Pass the divest in Wells Fargo. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Keith Anthony Sicona. Sikora, I'm sorry. It was one or the other. And then followed by Shannon Rivers, followed by Cheyenne Phoenix. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Budget and Finance Committee and the City Council for having us all here. I just came here as a concerned citizen, as I am deeply concerned about the practices that Wells Fargo do and your relationship with them. I personally was at Standing Rock, this past year, and it's not even about that. It's about all the fraudulent practices that they do. Our name, the City of Angels, is, to me, is something that's I'm very passionate about living here. And there's something about the LA community that stands for peace, justice. There's just a community here in Los Angeles that, from where else I've lived, it's never been anywhere else that I feel. And so the integrity that I feel that the City of Los Angeles represents to me in the 25 years that I've lived here, Wells Fargo does not represent those values. And so I am asking the City Council here to, in the Budget and Finance Committee, to divest from Wells Fargo. There's never really been an opportunity, the right time for change. Whenever there's always the catalyst of energy to actually move in another direction. And I feel that's where we are right now. is that we have the opportunity to not only do what's right, but to do what's kind, to do what the City of Los Angeles, the City of Angels stands for. And so I feel that taking our money where we do business and to stand in integrity is that we must do that now, not only for us, but for our children and our children's children and their children. And so I ask and just please request that you take this opportunity to do the right thing and divest the money from Wells Fargo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And just because I just wanted to let you all know, I got a lot of cards, and that's a good thing, but we're not going to be taking any more after the ones that I have, okay? So because this is going to take a while to get through, and it's now, 20, almost 25 after 2, so we're going to cut off new cards, but we will try to get through every single one that we have. So, Mr. Rivers?
Yes.
Okay. Who will be followed by Cheyenne Phoenix, who will be followed by Irene Montentes. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Shannon Rivers. I'm Akamir O'atam. My traditional territories are in the state of Arizona, but I am a new transplant to Los Angeles. I'm a student at UCLA. I'm a former delegate to the Indigenous Peoples Caucus at the United Nations on the rights of Indigenous peoples. During my tenure, a number was given to us, and that number was 380 million Indigenous peoples left in the world. They maintain territories and lands all over the world that are still pristine. What we do know, however, is that many of them, many Indigenous peoples across the world, lives are dramatically changing because of climate change, because of extractive industries that go into their territories and violate their human rights. Wells Fargo has had a long history and its atrocities against Indigenous peoples. Professor Ben Madley at UCLA wrote a book about, and one of the most extensive researches on Wells Fargo and Indigenous peoples and state actors. Divestment is critical, not just for me or for Indigenous peoples, but for all of us. You've heard the cliche, it's about our children, it's about the future, and it's about Mother Earth. We truly believe in that. We don't just honor our children, but we prove by our actions that we will fight for our children. And we ask that you do that today. It is critical for you to understand the importance of divesting. You'll hear many people. Malcolm X said before he died, I want to welcome to this room many of my friends and yes, some of our enemies. There are people here that will tell you that it's to continue to do business with them. But I ask you and urge you to divest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Cheyenne Phoenix, followed by, Irene Montentes, it looks like, followed by Lydia Ponce.
Yatse, hello, good afternoon, council. Thank you for having us. My name is Cheyenne Phoenix. I come from the Dene and Northern Paiute Nations. I was born and raised here in the Los Angeles Native American Indian community. And as somebody who benefits from the stolen land of the Tongva people and the stolen water of the Paiute people in Owens Valley that Los Angeles and everybody of the residents in Los Angeles benefits from, I wanted to speak about the divestment from Wells Fargo. As an Indigenous person, it directly impacts us and it affects us socially, economically, and every other level that you could think of. The government never wanted us to be here, but we're still here. And to understand that history, to understand our genocide, and to recognize that through this divestment from Wells Fargo is a way for us to heal those trauma, that history that has happened within our communities and within our lives that we still face today. As my brother Shannon said, our people on the reservations are facing drastic temperatures on the reservations right now, and that's here in the U.S., not in third world countries. They have no water, they have no electricity, they are living in third world country statuses right now, and they can't speak up. because we're here to speak up for them. We're here to speak up for our children. And a person by the name of Bill McKibben said that we're not doing anything radical here by standing up and speaking up for our air and our water, but we're standing up and speaking up against these oil companies, because you need water too. We all need water. Think about your children as well in the future, because we're all human beings and we all need this earth to live on. She's not a resource. We don't get resources from her. She is our main source that we're living here today and why we have our lives here today. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Irene Montentes, followed by Lydia Ponce, followed by Marcus Aguilar. And I'd like to ask you to come on up. If I've called your name, just come on up and grab a seat so you're ready to speak. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Irene Montentes. I am a mother of 2 boys, a human rights activist, and a news presenter for KPFK Radio. What is the relationship between Wells Fargo Bank and the oppression of indigenous people and the fight at Standing Rock? Why is Divest LA calling on the city of Los Angeles to divest from Wells Fargo? Wells Fargo morally bankrupted practices extend back to 1861. According to a historian and professor, Benjamin Madley at UCLA, as well as numerous archival evidence, Wells Fargo has had a direct hand in murder of indigenous peoples in California. In 1861, Wells Fargo accepted California state bonds from bondholders who would expedite the murder of indigenous peoples for profit. The bondholder would turn in the attached coupon to Wells Fargo in exchange for money. To view Wells Fargo and its long history of corruption and its role in the genocide of indigenous people, it can be easily found across the internet and in numerous literature. March 19, 1861, folder F3753-821, Military Department, General Indian War Papers, F3753. This is California State Archive. This archive can be found at www.oaccdlib.org. Letters from Wells Fargo Company to W.N. Kimby General stating a numerous number of people who bought war bonds, giving names, amount, bond number, asked for description of all different claims, written in New York, March 19, 1861. Letter from W.M. Kimby General to Wells Fargo, New York, acknowledging their letter of March 19, explains who is eligible to redeem bonds listed in that letter, says will help further if sent other names of bondholders, written in Washington, D.C., March 21, 1861. It has been long overdue that for Los Angeles to completely end their relationship with Wells Fargo. After learning about how far back the corruption goes with this bank, how can we sit back and allow the discrimination and corruption against our community and against our people?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lydia Ponce, followed by Marcus Aguilar, followed by, Tamara.
Casa.
Begins with a K.
Casa.
Thank you. So, Ms. Ponce.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I felt her words because those aren't just numbers, those are lives that were compromised 500 years plus. But in the last 100 years, what moves me almost to tears is that places like Venice, the West Side, if you Google search, you'll see the oil fields next to little craftsman houses with oil derricks in the front, in the back, and the sides of houses and oil wells. The last one removed is just under where the skate park is built currently in our area where I live. The fact that not one individual has been paid residuals or royalties, not one Tongva, not one of the original families, even from the 902-91 and the last 100 years, shows you the bank practices. The city got paid. None of you were there. I'm not holding you accountable. But today's a right day to make it right for the future, for everyone in this room, because we all benefited from that, because we're still here, indigenous and resilient, and standing together as accomplices and as allies to make the future healthy, the environment healthy for everyone. So this divestment is an easy step by voting yes and moving in the direction of healing for all people, letting and allowing and taking our place as indigenous people is the proper thing to do, because we've always known how to live with the land, and water, and how to honor our Earth Mother, because we are all her children. So with that, I ask that you please divest. Don't think twice about it. Just vote yes, because the benefits that we will reap in the future are not known to us yet. But let's share it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Marcus Aguilar, followed by Tamara Kosk, followed by Larry Smith.
Sakiltique nogniwan, nitoka Marcos Aguilar, Huitzilisli, iwan niwalewa El Sereno. El Sereno is in northeast Los Angeles in CD 14, and I serve over 370 children and about 200 families in our community that attend the only indigenous people's autonomous school in the city of Los Angeles, which is Anahuacalmecac, of which I'm the executive director of Semilla Sociedad Civil. I'm here to ask that this council committee support the call for divestment from Wells Fargo. The opportunity was given to this institution to do the right thing with regards to the investment that it made in the issue facing the people of Standing Rock with the DAPL pipeline. Now, many of these scars that have already been damaging our earth will not be able to be healed. But what we can do is what I hear a lot about, and that's hold people accountable. As an institution, it has a certain level of social justice that it ought to be able to meet, one that this city calls for when it grants contracts to such institutions. Its current level of service violates that, and it's your obligation as representatives of the citizens of this city, of which over 2 million are of indigenous peoples' origin. It's your obligation to end that contract, to divest the $8 billion, to pull out of Wells Fargo, and make sure that they remember, as an institution, that they cannot damage the earth and simply walk away from it, and that the people in this city will remember that. And if they want to come back to us, then they need to show something different. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Tamara Kosk. Case, followed by Larry Smith, followed by Maria Loya.
Good day, Council. Thank you for your time and having us here today. First of all, I'd like to honor the fact that this particular institution is on Tongva land. This actually was a Tongva village where City Hall is now located. And with that said, I think our city has a moral and ethical obligation to its people here. And we have the solutions right in front before us. We know that there's clean green energy. We know that we have to move out of the fossil fuel industry that has been devastating indigenous people and people of all backgrounds, races, and that we have the opportunity to move forward and to leave the fossil fuel industry in the past, move in the direction of clean green energy and sustainability for future generations. It's our moral and ethical responsibility to do so. And if we take a look at the inception of this country, it was built on stolen land and genocide and slavery of a people, that we have an opportunity, also right or wrong, and to stand before you and ask for your consideration. And I pray that your hearts and minds are transformed to do the right thing for not only just indigenous people, but all people, because this issue affects us on a global scale, not even locally. So whatever we do to the ecosystem, it's like a domino effect. A little bit of oil spilled in our water, ecosystem throws everything out of balance. And we can't afford these mistakes any longer. The Industrial Revolution is over, folks. We have the solutions before us, so we'd really like to see us move in that direction. Thank you, and have a blessed day.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Larry Smith, followed by Maria Loya, followed by Beverly Roberts.
Hello, Warwe, Kayai, Tongva, Pavu, Yangna, Larry Smith. Hello, it's good to see everybody. My name's Larry Smith. I'm Lumbee. I reside in the city of Long Beach, Signal Hill area, and work up here in Los Angeles. I'm happy to be here in Tongva, the traditional territories of the Tongva Nation, specifically the village of Yangna, which is where we are right now. And I came to speak to talk about the illegal and unethical practices of Wells Fargo and the moral obligation to divest from Wells Fargo. $11 billion plus is the amount of fines against Wells Fargo by various federal agencies since 2010. That's $11 plus billion. Most of those fines, out of 33 records, most of those fines come from Wells Fargo's banking practices. That is absurd, it's preposterous, it's outrageous that any city that represents people would have an interlocking relationship with a financial institution where it represents people where that financial institution harms the very people the city represents. It's irreprehensible as a practice by this city. This city, as you've heard from other speakers, has been responsible in partnering with Wells Fargo in its history against California indigenous peoples. It's most recently funded the Energy Transfer Partners Dakota Access Pipeline, and as you know, with the city of Los Angeles, the city was actually an oil town before it was an entertainment town. We have a legacy of subsidence throughout Southern California. Fossil fuel industry, I'm running out of time, is obviously driving global warming. We expect to lose 30 to 50% of Southern California's coastlines because of the fossil fuel industry, and no government agency should be banking with a financial institution that is engaged in criminal activity historically and locally.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Maria Loya, followed by Beverly Roberts, followed by Trinity Tran. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm with Committee for Better Banks. And as you know, Wells Fargo is the leader in the use of sales goals in the financial industry. They were so successful in pressuring its employees to open up new bank accounts and credit cards that other banks and financial institutions began adopting the same practices. As a result of Wells Fargo's predatory sales goals, employees were forced to open up more than 3 million fraudulent bank accounts and credit cards. This is an egregious crime against consumers. Recently, the CRA's rating for Wells Fargo was downgraded to needs improvement. At a time when the federal government is unwilling to hold banks accountable, city governments like Los Angeles must do their part in holding banks accountable that do business with them. I urge you to vote to support the divestment from Wells Fargo and to improving the banking service RFP. The same motivating factor that led Wells Fargo to open up these fraudulent accounts was greed for money. And that same greed for money has led the destruction of this planet and has led to the incarceration of families by having these banks invest in detention centers. And I think it's time to hold banks accountable. And by you holding these banks accountable, you will help restore trust in the banks. So thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Beverly Roberts, followed by Trinity Tran, followed by Phoenix Goodman. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Beverly Roberts, as he said, and I've been with ACE for 5 years, and I also work with Community for Better Banks. And the reason why I'm here to talk about this is because I've been with ACE for 5 years, and we have a section in our group called Home Defenders League, and I have seen some atrocities of people that have lost their home. And I have to tell you about this one particular family where the man blew his head off because he lost his home. And I thought it just broke me down because it shouldn't be like this. They took the wife's money that she had in her 401k and told them they could keep their home. 2 weeks later, they foreclosed on him. And 2 weeks after that, the man blew his head off. See, that's unacceptable. And another thing, I was with Wells Fargo for 20 years. Now, I didn't have that kind of thing. I didn't have my mortgage with them, but they did some crazy things with me, too. And this has got to stop, because we can't have this. The other banks do some of the same things. We've got to stop this. And then I also want to say, I don't want to forget, because you know I may be at age, but something I really wanted to say, but it kind of left me. But we've got to stop. Oh, I know what I want to tell you. You need to leave Wells Fargo as the city of LA. That's what I want to tell you.
Thank you. All right, our next speaker is Trinity Tran, followed by Phoenix Goodman, followed by Aura Vasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for scheduling this very important divestment motion. Thank you, Councilmember Mitchell Farrell, Councilmember Koretz, and Councilmember Bonin for introducing this motion. In the past 4 months, as the committee is well aware, we've had quite a visible presence through City Hall. We've been in the corridors, we've packed the committee rooms, we've packed the general council meetings, and we have done that because we are here to deliver a very important message, and that is we want our city to use our financial deposits as leverage to be able to create a world in which our communities and our people are able to thrive. We want to ensure that the city of Los Angeles holds Wells Fargo accountable for its long history of fraud, but we also want our city to take up its fiduciary duty to put our public funds in a bank that isn't below satisfactory. As you may know, recently the Mayor Bill de Blasio of New York City divested from Wells Fargo. They cited Wells Fargo's recently downgraded Community Reinvestment Act CRA rating as grounds to freeze all future contracts with Wells Fargo. In the city of Los Angeles, our current request for proposal, RFP, states that our city cannot bank with a bank that is below satisfactory. So we are here to urge the committee to implement its own laws. We started with Wells Fargo because that is the bank that Los Angeles primarily banks with. But ultimately, this movement is much larger than just one bank. This movement is about reversing the policies, the ideologies, the self-serving policies that have benefited corporations and financial institutions with complete disregard for the people and the planet. And so we are here to urge the city to make the right decision and divest. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Phoenix Goodman, followed by Aura Vasquez, followed by Michelle Milner. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you to the council. I'd like us to take a step back and look at what this institution is here, the public sector, the form of democracy, the fact that you all are elected representatives hearing the people. This is a system where your responsibility and power lies in acting in the will of the people and in what is best for the general good. This is your responsibility. Clearly, public sector funds, our tax dollars, support criminal activity. The power of the public sector and what your job is to use your values to reflect the will of the people. Now, if our funds are in criminal organizations, it is not an heroic act to move funds into more ethical institutions. Posterity does not remember leaders for doing the easy thing or staying status quo. Posterity remembers leaders for doing the hard things. Your history books will look back on the leadership of this council for their bravery and for their aligning values with what is good for the people and for the planet. We ask you to not do the easy thing, but do the right thing. At the end of the day, we are only asking for our public funds, our tax dollars, to bank with organizations that are more ethical. This is not this is not a difficult thing. This is the right thing, and please, we will all remember your values and your heroism for doing this thing today. Thank you for your ears today. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Aura Vasquez, followed by Michelle Milner, followed by Madeline Merritt.
Aura's not here. I'm Michelle Milner.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, everyone, for entertaining what we're talking about today. I'm a second-generation Angelina, and I'm very proud of seeing our local representatives listening to the constituents, and I feel honored to be here. I feel honored to be part of Los Angeles because I know that at other levels of government, the government has been compromised, and I'm hoping that at the local level, you're really here to represent the people and people's needs, and I do believe that that's why you're here and that's why you're in the positions that you're in. So I thank you for that. And all we're asking for is something very simple, to listen to your conscience. We're not picking on Wells Fargo, we're highlighting the acts of Wells Fargo today. We're not trying to politicize a process. We're trying to point out what needs to be done because of the crucial moment that we're in right now with our environment. I'm a mother of 3. I'm here, my kids are teenagers now, and they say, why is it that the next generation is always saying it's up to us? So I'm a mother who's saying, I'm here, I'm doing what I can. And to the institution of Wells Fargo, you can also step up. I know that you do things for the community, but you can do more. You can think about your investments and whether or not it's actually doing something for your children. Appeal to your conscience as well. We're all in this together, and let's all make this a planet that is habitable and livable for generations to come. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is Madeline Merritt, followed by Brooke Robbins, followed by Marcia Chu. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Krikorian, Martinez, Blumenfeld, Englander, Bonin. I appreciate your presence here today to listen to this important issue that we brought before you. I think you have a lot of opportunity today to really stand up and represent the interests of the people of Los Angeles by divesting from Wells Fargo. This is an institution that's done personal harm to many here in this city and is partially responsible for our current housing crisis in terms of the rising rents, which I'm a victim of, as well as a lot of people here in this room. My journey to Standing Rock changed my life. And I think a lot of people here in this room realize that we no longer have time to wait to prioritize our planet. Because of global warming, it is here. It is not some distant future. And unfortunately, Wells Fargo is continuing to invest in fossil fuel industries as well as the private prisons and committing fraudulent banking practices on communities of color and the most impoverished among us. It's not okay, and we as a people have an opportunity as well as an obligation to stand up for those who don't have a voice here in this room, to do the right thing, and to remove our banking relationship with the Bank of Wells Fargo here today. So I appreciate your support and your consideration of this very important issue as we move forward. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Brooke Robbins, followed by Marcia Chu, followed by Sarah Wiltfong.
Thank you, Brooke Teal Robbins. I'd like to first acknowledge, like all of us, for putting forth this motion. We really appreciate it, though you may not know how much you're appreciated. A lot of the people that are here today, it seems evident this is who's in attendance, but keep in mind there are many people that couldn't attend today because due to work and other subject matters. That said, we'd like for you to have a perspective to understand, which you may, but just to reiterate, which is really important to do so, that a lot of representatives of Wells Fargo's today. They may come across to you today with their fancy, attire and everything, persuading you that that's enough, that motion in itself is sufficient enough because of their relationship with you. But it's an illusion. Their relationship with you isn't as significant as my relationship or our relationship, who's for the divestment action. Though I'm a stranger, I actually have more significance in our relationship. Hi, nice to meet you, Brooke Robbins. Because I am a constituent. I am a voter. These voters that live in the area that are within your district, again, this is not everyone that could attend today. I happen to be with Indivisible, which I'm sure most, if not all of you, are familiar with. Indivisible, I happen to be with Indivisible Suffragists, where we hold meetings not only weekly for 3 hours at a time, but we hold a significant regional meetings each month for 3 hours at a time with various Indivisible groups in the Los Angeles County area. We've concluded that there's over 200 Indivisible groups, each ranging from roughly a couple hundred, maybe to even more than 1,000 social media-wise. And this is not to mention people that march in the streets. And we have consensus that this issue is important to vote on and to have the divestment issue be upheld and to understand the true relationship that you have is with the voters. And know that we will remember this day, good or bad, and please, for the good, vote for divestment today. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Marcia Chu, followed by Sarah Wiltfong, followed by Stuart Waldman.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to the members of the Budget and Finance Committee. My name is Marcia Chu, and I represent Wells Fargo's community relations. Although I'm part of this large institution, I also want to emphasize that I'm an individual that lives and works in Los Angeles, and I too am a voting constituent. I want to take this afternoon to share a little bit about the work that I do specifically for Wells Fargo. In community relations, we work to address the needs of low to moderate income communities. So the work that I do involves trying to create more affordable housing, economic development, workforce development, to support educational programs from cradle to career, build job opportunities and support job-creating organizations so that people can have livable wages and have the sufficient training and education to participate in this economy. We also work in neighborhood revitalization and to build healthy communities, which means ensuring access to health care, access to fresh foods, and our work is predicated on using an equity lens to make certain that we provide access to our most vulnerable populations, communities of color, foster youth. We work with providing housing for foster youth, and we target working with formerly incarcerated. I want to emphasize that I understand a lot of the sentiments that were expressed, but I wouldn't work for Wells Fargo if I didn't have the opportunity to serve my community and to be an advocate for the very important work that we do. So thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sarah Wiltfong, followed by Stuart Waldman, followed by Marie Rumsey.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Wiltfong, and I'm here on behalf of BizFed, the Los Angeles County Business Federation. We are an alliance of more than 165 business organizations who represent over 325,000 employers in LA County, and we are here to support Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo has played a vital role in our organization. Their executives have voluntarily provided information and expertise that help our broader membership succeed. They also support 30 of our individual nonprofit members, more than most of the companies that we work with. Earlier this year, Wells Fargo announced a $60 billion commitment to help more African Americans purchase homes, which is the first mortgage lender to do so. They are also California's top small business lender, making over $6 billion in small business loans last year. We are grateful for Wells Fargo's partnership, their generosity, and their investment in our community as a whole. And it is our hope that you will recognize the positive impact they have made in our region and take their contributions into account when you make your final decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Stuart Waldman, followed by Marie Rumsey, followed by Gary Tobin.
Good afternoon. My name is Stuart Waldman. I'm president of the Valley Industry and Commerce Association, VICA. We represent over 400 businesses in the San Fernando Valley. We are proud to support Wells Fargo, a California institution for 160 years, which employs over 44,000 Californians, more than 9,000 Angelenos, and takes an active role in our communities. Wells Fargo supports small businesses. In 2015, Wells Fargo extended over $6 billion in small business loans to California businesses. Demonstrating a commitment to our communities, in 2015 alone, Wells Fargo donated over $12 million to foundations in Los Angeles. Wells Fargo is committed to environmental sustainability and human and indigenous rights. The Dakota Access Pipeline represents just a fraction of Wells Fargo's energy story. Wells Fargo has provided over $70 billion in financing to environmentally sustainable businesses since 2012 and 2016.
Wait, Mr. Waldman, 1 second. Mr. Williams, I think that was only 1 minute. So can you give him 1 more minute, please? And folks, I need to tell you, as I said at the beginning, I will have respect for the speakers. Anybody who shouts out, makes comments while a member is speaking will be asked to leave the room, and I will have nothing less than that. Please, everyone was respectful when you spoke, and you spoke respectfully. Please respect the speakers who are speaking now, too, because it's up to us to hear from everyone and try to take that information into account when we make our decisions. So please, I have to run my meetings that way. Mr. Waldman, go ahead.
Thank you. Wells Fargo has provided over $70 billion in financing to environmentally sustainable businesses since 2012, and in 2016 produced 8% of all solar and wind energy generated in the United States. Los Angeles is lucky to have Wells Fargo as a partner in supporting our communities and businesses. And I did find it interesting that one of the previous speakers mentioned that Wells Fargo is just the first bank that they are going after. So please keep that in mind about when you're discussing this action. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Maria Rumsey, followed by Gary Tobin, followed by Carlos Rosales.
Good afternoon. My name is Marie Rumsey, and I'm here on behalf of the Central City Association. We strongly support Wells Fargo and appreciate its active and important role within downtown Los Angeles. Wells Fargo has been a California institution for 160 years and currently employs over 44,000 people in California. Small business plays an integral part of downtown's economy, and Wells Fargo has made a clear commitment to small business. In 2015, Wells Fargo extended $6.1 billion in small business loans to California business owners. In addition, Wells Fargo has made a commitment to community development, committing $1.8 billion in community development lending and investments in California. Wells Fargo is an important member of the downtown community, and CCA appreciates all their contributions they have made over the past 160 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Gary Tobin, followed by Carlos Rosales, followed by Kin Chen.
Members of the Council, my name is Gary Tobin. I'm representing the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce. And I'm representing a lot of people who are not here today. The 150,000 businesses, most of them small businesses that Wells Fargo banks. The 1,115,000 customers that Wells Fargo has here in the county of Los Angeles. You've already heard several speakers talk about Wells Fargo being the leader in Los Angeles County in small business lending with the SBA. Our community depends on these small businesses, and these small businesses depend on Wells Fargo. You've already heard about the 12,000 employees that Wells Fargo employs here in LA County, and the community involvement of many of those employees as volunteers. You've also heard about the fact that each year the Los Angeles Business Journal does a list of the companies in Los Angeles County and their philanthropy in Los Angeles City and County, and Wells Fargo leads that list every single year. This is a company that has been in Los Angeles since 1854, and they have made a difference in our community, and we urge you to oppose the motion today. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Carlos Rosales, followed by Kin Chen, followed by Jan Sobel.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Carlos Rosales, District Manager for Wells Fargo Bank here in Los Angeles, and I'm here in support of Wells Fargo. The city is well aware of Wells Fargo's philanthropic and community efforts, and I personally wanted to share with you what it means to me as a team member. I immigrated here with my parents at a young age, grew up in Highland Park right off the 110 freeway, and I can relate to the challenges that affect our residents each and every day. And that's why it's so important for me to be involved in the community in the role that I have now. And Wells Fargo supports me in doing so by allowing me to serve on the board of organizations like El Nido Family Care Centers, an organization focused on strengthening the family unit and developing our youth. I serve on the board of La Plaza de Cultura y Artes, where we instill pride in our community by telling our story of Los Angeles with the contributions of Mexican Americans. Wells Fargo not only supports my efforts financially, but by giving me the time to make a difference and build a better Los Angeles. On any given day, I'm able to conduct financial literacy workshops in South LA, where we help people take their dreams, build plans, and ultimately make that a reality. I can volunteer to help immigrants like myself start the process for applying for naturalization and help them understand the documents that they're filling out. I can mentor at-risk youth who grew up in the same neighborhoods that I grew up, give them advice and give them hope that they can be anything that they aspire to be. And Wells Fargo supports me in all of this because, like me, they believe in building a better Los Angeles. And I hope that the committee considers that when making a decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kin Chen, followed by Jan Sobel, followed by Reverend Mark Whitlock.
Thank you, committee members, for the opportunity to speak this afternoon on behalf of Wells Fargo. My name is Kin Chang, and I'm a client manager at Wells Fargo in the Middle Market Banking Group. I live in Hollywood with my husband in the Armbol Mitch O'Farrell's Council District 13. Representing Wells Fargo, I sit on the board of directors of the Los Angeles LGBT Center in Hollywood, which serves about 45,000 people per month. And Wells Fargo completed a significant financing last year for the center's new Anita Mae Rosenthien campus, which includes over $9 million of new market tax credits and $35 million of financing for this $100 million project, which will bring an estimated 60 transitional living beds for homeless youth and up to 100 affordable housing units for seniors. Also representing Wells Fargo, I sit on the board of East West Players, the longest running theater of color in the country, located in Little Tokyo, just a few blocks from this chamber. I joined Wells Fargo about 6 years ago specifically because of the bank's commitment to philanthropy in the communities we serve, in addition to the bank's unwavering support of diversity and inclusion for our team members who live, work, and thrive in LA, like myself. I'm the chairperson of the Wells Fargo Pride Team Member Network, the bank's LGBTQ Employee Resource Group. We have approximately 500 members in LA County of our 12,000 employee population. And our core values are around learning and development, opportunities to give back to the community. We participate in Long Beach Pride with over 100 employees, and we volunteer at the LA Food Bank in April. As an employee of Wells Fargo, and as a member of the LGBTQ community and the Asian American community, and a resident of Hollywood, I urge you to maintain this important and deep relationship between the City of Los Angeles and Wells Fargo. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jan Sobel, followed by Reverend Mark Whitlock, followed by Moises Cisneros.
Good afternoon. My name is Jan Sobel. I'm the retired CEO of the Boys and Girls Club of the West Valley, and I'm here to talk about how Wells Fargo has supported this community. 10 years ago, we could barely pay our bills. We went out to dozens of corporations, and the first one to step up was Wells Fargo, which allowed us to make payroll. And we will always be indebted for that continued support. 5 years ago, we started a program. We approached Wells Fargo. We said, we have a program called College Bound. We'd like you to support it. They gave us $25,000 for underserved and children who would not have the opportunity to go to college. We had 30 students at one high school, all of which graduated and went on to four-year college. This year we had 172 high school seniors with 3 high schools, and because of the continuing support of Wells Fargo, 100% graduated from high school and 92% went on to higher education. So it was Wells Fargo's vision to help us. 3 years ago, they started a program called Financial Literacy for our college-bound to help our kids know what to do when they got to college so they wouldn't get into financial debt. They care about kids, they care about our kids, they care about lots of children. If you've ever attended their, one of their meetings with over 50 nonprofits where they hand out money to nonprofits who really need it, they are engaged. And on a personal level, I want to tell you a little bit about my sister who 5 years ago had cancer, was unable to work for more than a year, and was about to lose her house and be put out on the streets, or at my house. But with the help of Wells Fargo, they renegotiated, gave her some leeway, and again, she was able to stay in her house. So they are caring, they're giving, and they're very supportive of those who need us the most. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Our next speaker is Reverend Mark Whitlock, followed by Moises Cisneros, followed by Jay Soloway.
Good afternoon. I am Najuma Smith-Powell. I'm standing in for Mark Whitlock. He could not make it due to an emergency. And I am the program manager at the Cecil Murray Center. So I'll be speaking strictly about how Wells Fargo has supported our financial literacy program since 2012. Wells Fargo has partnered with us in our financial literacy program that teaches congregants within Los Angeles, all around South LA, to improve their personal economics. And so they have made a great investment in South LA and around Los Angeles in helping congregations become stronger in their financial literacy as well as their congregations. And we have enjoyed that partnership since 2012. And the program has run really well, and we appreciate them for that. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I could just ask you to correct this card.
I will do that, sure.
So that has the correct name on it. Thank you. Our next speaker is Moises Cisneros, followed by Jay Soloway, followed by Bob Smiland.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for your bravery. My name is Moises Cisneros. I'm the Executive Director of the LA Latino Chamber of Commerce, and I'm also representing our Chairman of the Board, Gil Vasquez. We're here to state that we have, as an organization, benefited greatly from Wells Fargo's commitment to ourselves and our Latino business community, specifically when it comes to small businesses. They have helped us with funding, many training and workshops that without which we believe our small businesses would have been deeply hurt. A lot of financial literacy is something that we focus on because Wells Fargo helps fund those programs. I'm also a recipient of a grant that, one of many recipients that Wells Fargo helps to fund in terms of training executive directors to lead their nonprofits. It's something that we could not afford without Wells Fargo's help. We believe that Wells Fargo is sincere when they say that their suppliers are committed to be governed by ethical business and environmental stewardship practices as stated in their supplier code of conduct. We believe Wells Fargo should be given the time to legally pull their financing away from the Dakota Access Pipeline and continue the good work that they have done in our local communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jay Soloway, followed by Bob Smiland, followed by Elise Buick.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. My name is Jay Soloway, and I am the Director of Training and Education at JVS Los Angeles. We are a nonprofit partner of the City of Los Angeles with a history of close collaboration with the City Council on workforce development initiatives. Wells Fargo has been a generous partner for JVS for the past 16 years. In 2006, they were the founding donor of our award-winning JVS BankWorks Career Training Program, and have been joined in that effort by over a dozen major financial institutions. Together, we have placed over 1,000 graduates into sustainable middle-class jobs in the banking industry. Recently, they became, with Wells Fargo, accounting for 277 of those hires. Recently, they became the founding donor on a new initiative, the JVS Impact Fund for Women, which will provide additional support for at-risk girls and women veterans and job seekers. We understand this is a complicated issue and encourage you to take into account the transformative impact of Wells Fargo's commitment to our community as you consider this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Bob Smiland, followed by Elise Buick, followed by Byron Shinyama.
Thank you very much. Bob Smiland, born and raised Angelino, currently live at 4th and Alameda, and privileged to be the president of Inner City Arts here in Skid Row area, serving all of LA. For 28 years, we provide joy and hope and inspiration to kids who have really little to sometimes get out of bed for, and I can't imagine how we would have done it without the 19 years of consistent support from Wells Fargo. Their intentions are pure, they're incredibly wonderful to work with, and before you would vote yes on this motion, I would urge you to really understand the impact on the community. I raise money for a living, and it's tough. It's really, really tough. And Wells Fargo is the most generous supporter of our community in Los Angeles, and I think you need to understand the value they bring to us. This Friday, their volunteers are on campus helping our juniors in high school open their first accounts and learn financial literacy. We couldn't do it without them. The social justice I seek today is for tens of thousands of poor children of color, of disability, of disadvantage, who need folks like Wells Fargo and supporting the nonprofits like us to help them through life. Without it, it would be really detrimental. So I urge you to really understand the value of this great corporation on this city. As an individual, a gay man, I'd like to thank them for their support of equality. I didn't understand it until I recently came out and found out how great these people are for decades, long before it was popular, to support equality of all kinds, all civil rights. I'm very, very proud to be a friend of Wells Fargo.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Elise Buick, followed by Byron Shinyama, followed by Victoria Jamil.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me today. On behalf of United Way and hundreds of health and human service providers, I would like to urge the council members to take into totality the full picture of Wells Fargo. They have not been a fly-by-night corporate citizen. They've been one who's been in the trenches with all of us for decades. And as you know, we dedicated our lives to helping people move out of poverty, and Wells Fargo has been with us every step of the way. They have truly transformed the lives of thousands of veterans, students, our formerly homeless neighbors, as well as families. And I would say in a time of ever-shrinking federal dollars, their involvement is very important. It's not just their corporate funding, it's also the involvement of their employees. They have dedicated 40,000 hours in the community, and they all give generously, and they're very active serving on nonprofit boards. So today, as you consider your vote, I urge you to really, truly consider the decades-long record of Wells Fargo and to take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Byron Shinyama, followed by Victoria Jamil, followed by Mileen Carbery.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. Thank you for having me. My name is Byron Shinyama. I'm the Director of Community Development Services with the Koreatown Youth and Community Center. And on behalf of KYCC, I'd like to show KYCC support for Wells Fargo. You've heard all the statistics, you've heard all the stories, but just a gentle reminder as a nonprofit with Wells Fargo's support, KYCC, along with many other agencies, were able to provide help for the homeless, jobs to the unemployed, technical assistance to small businesses, counseling for the mentally ill, after-school activities for youth, and hope for those suffering from addiction. And one example of what KYCC and Wells Fargo are able to accomplish is that this past year, KYCC, along with the coalition that we lead, was able to do over 10,000 free tax returns for the citizens of Los Angeles, which brought back over $12 million in returns for these folks. And so that's just one small example. So I encourage the city of Los Angeles to retain their partnership with Wells Fargo, because although there are things that made improvement, they do a lot of good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Victoria Jamil, followed by Mileen Carbery, followed by Maya Rose Burke.
Good afternoon. I'm Victoria Gemmel. I'm Pitt River, Wintun, Yana, and Athabasca Nations. I'm following up after listening to a few of these individuals who actually benefit financially from Wells Fargo. I'm here to speak against that, and one of the things I do want to say is that I want to cite the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which the U.S. signed on over 10 years ago, which the state of California adopted in 2014. Specifically, Article 8, which states Indigenous people and individuals have a right to not be subjected to forced assimilation or destruction of their culture. Article 32, Indigenous people have the right to determine and develop priorities and strategies for development or use of their lands, territories, and resources. 2, states shall consult, cooperate in good faith with the Indigenous peoples concerned through their own representative institutions in order to obtain their free and informed consent prior to approval of any projects affecting their lands and territories and other resources, particularly in connection with the development, utilization, or exploitation of mineral, water, and other resources. 3, states shall provide effective mechanisms for just and fair redress for any activities, and appropriate measures shall be taken to mitigate adverse environmental, economic, social, cultural, or social impacts. I also want to say we're here to request that the City of LA to divest as it violates code of public funding, responsibilities, and ethics. The impacts on the extractive industries that it has directly on the youth. I wanted to share specifically in connection of personal ethics and responsibilities to the youth as a mother of 3 children.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mileen Carbery, followed by Maya Rose Burke, followed by Melissa Michelson.
Excuse me. I heard my name. I heard you call my name. You did say KU to me, and that was before she spoke. That's why I came up here. And I
Kei Utsumi?
Yeah.
I do have your card, but I don't think I called your name, sir, yet, but I will get to you. I will get to you. If you just you can sit, be comfortable.
Yeah.
Okay, Mileen Carbery, followed by Maya Rose Burke.
Hi, thank you so much. I feel like we're all family now because I'm here so often. The only person we're missing is Mr. Herman today, and
yeah, thank you.
We're not missing him.
Now we are family. Now we're family.
Okay, so here goes. My minute is going, but I stand for divestment. I'm a mom, and I, work in the mental health industry for child development, and we always teach parents that there is no mental health without ethics. There is no mental health when people live in the shadow. And Wells Fargo has been conducting itself in a shadow, behind the scenes, unethically. I hear people are saying they have benefited from Wells Fargo, but there's many people that have been hurt by Wells Fargo. And though there might be benefits, how can we live with ourselves knowing that it was done at the expense of others? I can't do that. And nor do I want my children to do that. I don't want them to step on someone to get higher. I want them to be next to the most vulnerable and help lift others up, and then they'll get higher. So that's my stance. Please, let's divest from unethical banking practices. We have other options, and be in the forefront of an extraordinary city. We're doing so many other incredible things with the city that this is just the next step. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Maya Rose Burke, followed by Melissa Michelson, followed by Marcy Ramsey.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maya Rose. I don't think I've seen you all face-to-face before, but I just came back from Standing Rock. I was there for about 5 months, and before that, I had lived my whole life in Los Angeles. Born and raised, Topanga Canyon. I want to honor the Tongva people that we walk with every day, that we are consistently surrounded by as far as their ancestors, and living, breathing humans that we walk with, our water that is genuinely stolen from our Paiute relatives that needs to be acknowledged. As a young woman in this city, as an artist, as a human being, I come to you standing against Wells Fargo, begging that we divest from people that are consciously promoting and funding pipelines which use armed weapons, which hurt people, which hire mercenaries, which are deciding to partake in the slavery of everyone that lives in this country. The people that are being benefited by Wells Fargo, I understand. That's great that you are the minority that they are allowing to fuel and live and have a family story, but there are so many people that have been killed, that have been left homeless, that are left with no place to be, and that needs to be acknowledged. I'm 23 years old. I have a long life of living in Los Angeles, of protecting the water, of protecting my indigenous brothers and sisters, because we're blessed to walk here. And you guys are not the ones to be held accountable, right? But you are the ones to sit in council and decide the fate of the future. Divest. Weave in a good way with me. Walk in a good way, because whether or not Wells Fargo has been meaning to, they have a history of genocide since they arrived. And I refuse to be a part of that. And I encourage you to hold my hand and be a part of that solution in prayer, because it's kind of beautiful not participating in that karmic cycle of hurting others. And the last thing is, I suppose I love you all, and I hope that we can be relatives for the rest of our lives and walk in a good way.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Melissa Michelson, followed by Marcy Ramsey, followed by Colin Kramer.
Hello. Hi. My name is Melissa Michelson. I'm first a proud native of Los Angeles. I'm also a professor. I'm an appointed delegate to the Democratic State Party in the state of California, and I'm the founding president of Feel the Burn Democratic Club of LA County. We are a chartered club with the LA County Party and have hundreds of members who are activists and delegates to the state party all over LA. These 700 delegates to the state were elected by their communities and represent hundreds of thousands of voting Democrats in the city of LA. Our motto is people over profits. I'm here today representing the others who took the time out of their day, those who are not paid by Wells Fargo or business interests, including the overflow room on the side, including the 3.4 thousand people that are watching right now on social media from that camera. Hey. And my students as well, who are shocked and outraged to see the Standing Rock developments and who are following this divest movement in Los Angeles civics closely. I am here to urge you to support this motion to divest our money from Wells Fargo. You are holding our money. These are our tax dollars, and the city is holding that for us. We are keenly aware of the choice you are going to make today. We are newly engaged, we are extremely connected, and we're ready to hold our officials accountable and represent the people. And we want you to represent the people. The dichotomy set up today from the business interest is a false one. Take your money out of Wells Fargo and the community groups supposedly suffer. The city can invest the money in other banking institutions or credit unions, and they can do wonderful things for this city. You have the choice to do the right thing to divest from Wells Fargo and make us proud to be residents and voters in the city of Los Angeles. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Marcy Ramsey, followed by Colin Kramer, followed by Brian Moeller. Is Marcy Ramsey here? Okay, we'll come back to her. Mr. Kramer?
Good afternoon. My name is Colin Kramer. I'm a third-generation Angelino, as well as one of Chairman Krikorian's constituents. What brings me here today is my concern for Los Angeles continuing to hold its people's money in an institution as unethical and unscrupulous as Wells Fargo for three reasons. Number one, their role in the subprime mortgage catastrophe and their predatory lending practices against countless members of this community. Number two, their stake in the Dakota Access Pipeline. And number three, their financing of the private prison industry. My mom actually had a mortgage with Wells Fargo, and through deceptive, predatory lending practices, they wound up foreclosing on her house. Even worse, it turns out they were betting on the fact that she would default on her loan because that was a way to make even more money on the mortgage. In March of this year, CNN reported that Wells Fargo also discriminated against students, pregnant women, and veterans with similar predatory lending practices, repossessing 413 motor vehicles owned by military service members. Couldn't they have given those guys a break? Second, banks are meant to provide us with stability, not thuggery. And I'm sure everyone's already aware that Wells Fargo spearheaded the Dakota Access Pipeline and is both a humanitarian and a constitutionalist. I'm calling for all parties to do everything in their power to withdraw support for this pipeline, because not only is it invading a sovereign nation, but no environmental impact review has been carried out. So it's going to do untold devastation for generations to come. We know this because at least 3% of the toxic oil waste is going to be leaking into our food, water, and even our air sources. Eventually, yes, we do breathe that all in. And finally, I urge us to follow in President Barack Obama's footsteps when he canceled all federal contracts with the private prison industry. Prisons exist to protect us from criminals, not to empower the same people that have been taking advantage of the most vulnerable and disadvantaged communities.
Thank you. Are you Oda?
I'm speaking on behalf of Marcy Ramsey.
Oh, okay. So if you could just
My name is Brandy Maxey.
go ahead, and then when you're done, if you could just include your name on here to correct the card, please, I'd appreciate it. Is that the right one? Marcy Ramsey, right?
Yeah. My name is Brandy Maxey. I'm speaking on her behalf.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So my name is Brandy Maxey, and I'm a Dakota woman. I actually came from the Standing Rock camps, the Chatishikoin, that was raided on February 23rd. I rolled out with a group called the Rolling Resistance, which we called afterwards the Rolling Resistance. We're people from all different tribes all over Turtle Island, which is Canada and the United States of America. I'm a mother of 3. We got stuck here, so we've been here for a few months now, and it's a beautiful place, and we've been very well welcomed by the Chumash people here. So I'm just here to urge you to divest and don't be fooled by the numbers, because behind those numbers is a lot of years of genocide on my people. And more recently, we faced the Dakota Access Pipeline resistance. My daughter was with me as well, and because my daughter was with me, she's 13 years old, when things got a little too out of hand, I had to send my 13-year-old girl home and tell her that it was too dangerous for her to be there, because she's starting to resemble a woman now. And because she's starting to resemble a woman, I'm afraid that the police are going to brutalize her like they were brutalizing me. I'm still sick from the spraying of the chemicals. That's still continued genocide. That's still investing into genocide. So all the numbers are great and everything, and the Boys and Girls Club investments are great and everything. But you also have to look at the ones that they're oppressing and continue to oppress, which are my daughter, my children, myself, my communities, my people, we're not going anywhere. That's the thing. We're not going anywhere. We're going to stay here, and we're going to continue to defend the lands and the waters, but we want to walk hand in hand, because there's treaties that were signed. Everyone's here because of those treaties and because of those nation-to-nation relationships that are supposed to exist. Keep that in mind with your investments.
Thank you. So, okay. Our next speaker is Brian Moeller, followed by Mr. Utsumi, followed by, and then I'll give a last chance to Aura Vasquez in case she's here. Mr. Moeller.
All right, council members, Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm here representing the small business segment of Wells Fargo. I'm a senior vice president and manager for the region of the small business segment. So as it was previously said, we serve over 150,000 small business customers here, with over 600 bankers solely dedicated to serving small business customers. As it's common for our leadership team, as you've heard, we actively volunteer in our communities, we work and live, and the company provides several paid days to do so. Wells Fargo supports thousands of team members, just like me and Carlos, to do volunteer projects, including building houses for veterans through Habitat, create opportunities for struggling home and business owners, and provide needed support of education and financial literacy in all phases of their lives. Personally, I serve on several boards, including the LA Chamber of Commerce, where I focus mostly on access to capital, but also access to education through mentorship, Higher LA, and the Cash for College programs. I also serve on Jewish Family Service, whom, if you remember, you honored Paul Castro last Friday with a proclamation. The Promises Foundation Miriam's House, which provides shelter for pregnant and homeless women with children while they go through recovery, and the Los Angeles Opera, where I have the honor of serving to help provide access to the arts with providing seats for low and moderate income Angelenos for every performance. The Wells Fargo is a vital partner to Los Angeles because, one, for the last 13 years, we have delivered more lending to small businesses than any other bank in America. Two, for the last 2 consecutive years, we have led in Los Angeles with providing more SBA lending. And three, as mentioned by Mitch O'Farrell, our Community and Reinvestment Act score is actually outstanding in Los Angeles.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kai Utsumi, and then last chance for Aura Vasquez.
I'll be speaking for Aura.
Okay. Like so many others that spoke before me against for divestment against Wells Fargo, I urge the city to divest from Wells Fargo's bank for funding oil pipeline which pollute Mother Earth, that always puts people secondary or third. And for them, making profit is the main motive. When they support all these small businesses, they're making profit off of small business. That's why. And the indigenous people have always treated the earth, the water, the air as life-giving, especially true today as the danger of climate change and massive destruction globally is real. It's getting worse and worse. We haven't seen the worst of it. The Sioux Indians protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline in North Dakota recently attracted many environmental ecologists, thousands of U.S. veterans, farmers, students from throughout the country against the pipeline for many, many months. That's only one of many protests today against the oil pipeline by people of this country living near pipeline, because the pipelines always corrode and leak and pollute the earth and water or whatever. Wells Fargo's primary interest is not humanitarian, but profit. Climate change is real. It's real.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. And I'm sorry, are you associated with an organization?
Yes. Committee for Better Banks. My name is Giselle Mata, and I'll be speaking on behalf of Aura.
Okay.
Okay. So again, my name is Giselle Mata, and I'm an organizer with ACE and Committee for Better Banks. And Committee for Better Banks is a nationwide organization that is working to improve the lives of bank workers, but also to hold banks accountable to their workers and to their consumers. We're partnered with unions, nonprofits, current and former bank workers and consumers. So we're actually here to speak to those 5,200 workers that were terminated by Wells Fargo. Many of those have joined Committee for Better Banks because they want to tell their story. So October of 2016 and September of 2016, we saw many bankers come forward from our committee to speak to those issues that the CEO at the time, John Stump, began to blame the frontline bank worker. Now, those frontline bank workers represented individuals that Wells Fargo claimed had committed fraud. Through these aggressive sales goals, these workers were actually the ones that would not commit fraud. So after I organized bank workers, spoke to hundreds of them, what came up was many of these workers who were whistleblowers went to their immediate supervisor and were then targeted for termination. So we understand that this was a major cover-up because the individuals who were terminated were not the ones that were committing the fraud, and it was just the opposite. And so just some statistics. So female bank workers, roughly 1.7 million men and women work in retail banking. They are overwhelmingly, and this represents 84.3% women. and nearly 1 in 3 banks pays their workers less than $15 an hour. This is the frontline bank worker. In 2014, researchers at the University of California, Berkeley found that nearly 1/3 of tellers' families were enrolled in government assistance programs, Medicaid and/or CHIP health programs, supplemental nutrition food stamps at a public cost to taxpayers of nearly $900 million per year. So we look at this as an opportunity to get divestment from LA, and we hope that you'll vote yes.
Thank you very much. And so that concludes our cards. Thank you all very, very much for this input, and for, it's rare that Budget and Finance has such a packed room full of people with strongly held views who are so respectful to one another. And so I appreciate it, and thank you for that. It allowed us to get through and I think get a lot of substantive information from all of you, and I appreciate it very much. So we have 3 somewhat related items on the agenda that touch upon Wells Fargo and banking in general. And I want to start, I guess, by saying that I think we in Los Angeles, like the rest of the country, were shocked at the revelations that came out about the long-standing policy of Wells Fargo in creating, or at least of some component within Wells Fargo, of creating false accounts for consumers and maximizing profits based on incentives that encouraged that practice to happen. And I'm proud that our city attorney stepped up and took action relating to that, and initiated litigation and reached a settlement with Wells Fargo in response to that. Related to that, that had to do with consumer accounts, of course. One of the issues that came to my mind and some of my colleagues' minds was, well, if that policy affected consumers in our city, might the city of Los Angeles also have been impacted by that because of our many depository relationships and otherwise? So I introduced the motion that's reflected in item number 15, calling for a report from the CAO regarding a report from the Office of Finance relative to Wells Fargo's illegal activities and investigations into the city's bank accounts as well, and requesting a report from the CAO relative to terms in RFPs which would allow the city to take any remedial action against any banking and financial institution contractors relating to such activities. So I'd like to ask if we have a representative of the Office of Finance and or the CAO to come on up and present on that. Yeah, this is on item 15 now. And since I probably didn't do a very good job of restating it, can we go ahead and introduce item 15 as well, please? Since there are people in the room next door and otherwise who are listening.
Item number 15 is a report from the City Administrative Officer relative to terms in RFPs to allow the city to take remedial action against banking and financial institution contractors, and report from the Office of Finance relative to Wells Fargo illegal activities and investigations into the city's bank accounts.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Todd Bowie, Office of Finance. I'll speak to the investigation into the city's bank account portion at first. We did, as Council suggested and requested, go through and actually take a look at all of our 800-plus accounts with Wells Fargo, and it was quite an extensive review, but we did match them all up to our own originating requests. This is obviously with the commercial banking side of the bank, and so the nature of the city's relationship with the bank is one in which there is a great deal of oversight and a great deal of involvement in the establishment of accounts. We have processes and protocols that get followed, and so we have documentation that allows us to maintain and manage those accounts. We also are obviously receiving significant statements from the banks as well, which we also monitor and review on an ongoing basis. One thing that we do mention in our report here, something for future consideration, is that because of the extensive amount of information and analysis that's required for the accounts that we have, that we do believe it would be beneficial for the city to explore procuring analytic software that would enable us to better review and manage and analyze the accounts and ensure that we are getting the right charges and getting the correct services according to our very complicated contracts that we have.
Okay.
Good
Anybody else?
afternoon. Zara Bukiran with the Office of the CAO. I'll be speaking about regarding the report on requests for proposals terms for future banking contracts to allow the cities to take remedial action against financial institution contractors that are fined by banking regulators, including forfeiting bank fees on the city's accounts for the remaining duration of such a contract. So currently, the city's current agreement for government banking services includes a termination clause, which allows for the forfeiture of bank fees after the date of the termination of the contract. The recommendations in this report are to ensure the timely disclosure of regulatory actions or fines to the city. So the recommendations in this report include instructing the Office of Finance and the CAO to include in RFPs and agreements with banking and financial institutions a requirement that the institution disclose to the city any public enforcement action undertaken by any federal, state, or local agency against the institution within 10 days after an action is taken or a fine is imposed. The second recommendation is to instruct the Office of Finance and the CAO to report to the City Council of any such notification within 30 days after the action or fine is disclosed to the city. Finally, the third recommendation includes to instruct the Office of Finance and CAO to seek to negotiate terms in future banking and financial institution contracts that hold contractors for which an agreement has been terminated liable for any and all excess costs incurred by the city for procuring services similar to those so terminated. Such costs may include the administrative costs of preparing an RFP and carrying out the selection process, as well as one-time costs to migrate data or transfer bank accounts, disbursement services, merchant card processing, and payroll services to a different financial institution.
Okay. Did you want to add anything?
Saul Romo with the Office of Finance. Simply wanted to inform the committee that we certainly are hearing all of the recommendations. We are taking what you are considering here and are ready to incorporate any recommendations that you feel appropriate into the RFP, and will certainly take any direction and report back as necessary.
Okay, so just to be clear on this, in terms of any future RFP with any financial institution that the city may wish to establish a relationship with, in addition to any other requirements that we may have regarding compliance with the responsible banking ordinance or any number of other factors that we might want to take into account. In addressing this specific issue, what the CAO is recommending is including in the RFP a requirement that it would be a continuing requirement of the banking institution to report to the City of Los Angeles anytime they are found to be guilty of a violation by a state or federal agency anywhere in the country.
That
right?
is correct, within 10 days.
Okay, so that would be immediately reported to us so that we would be able to determine whether similar violations might be occurring in Los Angeles or whether some response might be appropriate from the City of Los Angeles. Yes?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, this does include local agencies as well. And not to get into the weeds too much on this, but local agencies might find a violation for any number of very minor things that a 10-day reporting requirement might be a little onerous. I would suggest that with state and federal it remain at 10 days. With local agencies, maybe a cumulative reporting so that the city still gets the report, but if they're cited because they didn't board up a window properly on a foreclosed home, I don't know if I need to know about that if it happened in Michigan within 10 days. But just for the sake of ease of our digesting that information and being able to deal with it, I would suggest that the local fines be reported on an annualized basis, but state and federal continue to be reported within 10 days of their occurring. And then Okay, and so then the department, the CAO, would immediately report those to the council within 30 days. And then I think the third point is important as well, because currently, if there is a termination of a contract, we don't capture from the financial institution that is responsible for that termination. We don't capture the costs of having to go and find a new financial institution to replace them, right? And so this is intended to address that. So for example, there are over 800 accounts right now, depository accounts that the city has with Wells Fargo, is that right?
Correct.
And then in addition to that, there are other relationships, government bonds that may be issued, maybe direct investments by our pension institutions. There could be any number of different aspects of that relationship. If those were to be replaced because of misconduct on behalf of, on the part of this financial institution or any financial institution, the city would incur substantial costs just to replace that financial institution. Right. And so the idea would be going forward, if there is wrongdoing on the part of a financial institution that leads to that termination, it's that financial institution that should bear the costs of being replaced and not the taxpayers. That's the recommendation. Okay. Okay. So any discussion on this item, members, or questions of finance or the CAO on this or the other items? Mr. Blumenfield.
Yeah, on this one, I love that idea of getting the financial institution to bear those costs.
You might want to pull your mic a little closer.
I love the idea of getting the financial institution to bear those costs, and I want to understand a little bit more how that could work, though, from a practical perspective, because it's a great idea. So if there is evidence that they've violated a state or federal, we then find out about it. We have 90 days to terminate. We then try to tell them we're terminating because you've done X, Y, and Z, and now you have to pay those costs. Is that correct? And
correct. It's modeled after something we found in LA County's own agreements with financial institutions. They have a similar clause to what's being recommended here. I don't know that they've ever had to exercise it. I believe they may not have. But nevertheless, it is something that they have been able to include in certain of their contracts, and so we would basically seek to include similar type of language. But essentially, if I could use just our current banking services as an example, in transitioning from one bank to another, it would impact all the city departments effectively. Even though we have this contract as a city, each department sort of acts on its own in terms of having its own receivables processes. Certainly there are a number of different payment systems that are involved in the city. And so each one of them would basically need to undergo a process of moving all of their accounts from one bank to another, including all of the technology integrations that have occurred for each one of these departments. So basically, every dollar that's coming in, every dollar that's going out is enabled because of our banking services agreement. And so you have, basically these 40 departments would have to be changing out things like their interfaces. They would need to have systems folks, working on those types of things. Their accounting staff be working on changing out all of their merchant services accounts, et cetera. So the cost to the city, certainly both financially and in terms of workload, will be significant in making any sort of changes, and those are the types of costs that we would try to capture in order to effectuate that change.
But it still ends up being, it's a discretionary act by the council, I guess, to say, okay, you violated X, Y, and Z, therefore we're yanking the contract, right? There's not an automatic threshold of what's been violated?
No, I don't think this proposes an automatic threshold, but it does give a vehicle by which to exercise that.
Okay. Well, I guess this is getting those options out. I like the idea. I'm worried about legally how it works. So if something happens in Michigan or anywhere, and then we make that finding, and then we say, you sign the contract, it's kind of an open-ended amount. So, or is there is it defined in the contract how much that could be or not?
I think it would definitely be a subject of negotiation, and so potentially it could be something where some sort of a cap was identified or further parameters were identified. I suspect that financial institutions would probably want to see such things in order to sign off.
I think as we go forward and craft future agreements as well as any potential in future RFPs, we'll certainly work closely with our colleagues in other departments to ensure that whatever language we craft and whatever language is finally adopted can ensure that the city does recover its costs, that it can meet a reasonable form of administrative, legislative, and judicial review if necessary.
Natalie Brill, CAO. I think this also applies to the responsible banking ordinance because as part of the responsible banking ordinance, the banks are required to do certain things. And if they violate those things, that could be one of the causes to terminate the contract. I mean, I think that we're writing this in the framework of the responsible banking ordinance because that's going to give you the rules that they have to follow, right? You have to report this, you have to report that. And we haven't gotten to revising the ordinance yet. I mean, that's one of the things we're working on. And working on the forms they have to fill out and how they're going to report what they're doing. And I think that this is written in that context. It's not going to be arbitrary, right? There's going to be what are you exactly violating that would terminate a clause like that? And I think that the basis of that is part of the responsible banking ordinance. I think that was what we were thinking when we wrote that.
Okay. Mr. Englander.
Just briefly. Well, if that's the direction we're going in, one of the questions I'd have then is on the responsible banking ordinance, what about things we don't spell out and don't know? I mean, how vague can we get? I mean, one of the issues I have with it is that, as an example, with this institution, they preyed on a lot of people, a lot of individuals with opening a lot of accounts, and nobody knew about it. And so we'd find out later, and we could come back and say, well, yeah, but it wasn't captured in our responsible banking ordinance because we didn't identify the fact that. So we don't know what they're capable of in the future. Or anybody for that matter. So how can we? Is it going to have something in there as a catch-all for certain kinds of regulatory prosecution if something happens rather than specific types of practices? Because they could create new fraudulent practices, later get in trouble for it. We didn't capture it in the ordinance.
There are two things I think that we're looking at as part of the responsible banking ordinance. One of them is the whistleblower protection. The other one is, what was the second one? The consumer.
I believe it's consumer financial protection laws.
And those are federal agencies that write those rules, right? We're not they're the regulators.
So
right?
So
they regulate, and then we ask them to report on those. Now, if they violate that, that's what I think recommendation number 2 is about, right? That you're going to report to us when you've been fined or something has happened to you, and if you violated the responsible banking ordinance.
Right.
That's why we haven't really. We're starting to rewrite the responsible banking ordinance, right? And this is like the first step in that, right? The first step is this RFP. Because the CAO also holds contracts with letters of credit, and those, you can't really terminate them before a year is up because of
penalties.
Yeah, that's just the way they're written. So, for example, MICLA has a $130 million letter of credit with Wells Fargo. You terminate that, it's going to cost you money before the year is up, right? So the question will be, what happens if they, violate something within that year period? That's something that we'll have to bring to council, and then you have to make a decision: do we pay the termination fee and then and move on, or what happens after that? It's complicated because of how complicated our finances are, but I think the basis of what you're asking will be the responsible banking ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Members?
Not on this one.
Ms. Martinez.
Have we ever imposed remedial action against any previous financial institutions?
Remedial, I'm not sure what that means. I think the city attorney would.
I think that,
There's been lots.
yeah, what remedial action, it's quite a broad term. When we find some cost differences between in our accounts analysis or in our statements, we certainly rectify the situation with the banks when appropriate. The bank does provide restitution. But in terms of any long-term remedial action that is contractual, not to my knowledge.
I have never terminated a contract for cause in the letters of credit that we hold with the different banks. CAO has never done that.
Maybe we should start to. If we choose not to exercise a final contract extension option based on the fact that Wells Fargo committed fraud against their customers, could we recoup the cost of the procured services from the interim contractor?
Speaking towards item number 7, correct? It's basically that's allows us the business continuity to continue with the city's current financial services while we go through the process of procurement for financial services going forward. Though we do have obviously the ability to extend or not extend or terminate or continue. The city does not have a fallback financial institution that could take over the responsibilities of Wells Fargo. We're looking at probably a year-long process of changing over if we were to move in a new direction with new financial institutions. As Wells Fargo is presently our only banking institution, the city doesn't have any sort of backup bank, and the challenge of moving over all of the accounts and the services and the technology will be quite significant.
Yeah, this is more related to item 7, so I have further questions, and I'll get to that later.
But it is related, and I just want to follow up on that for
I
one
want to
second.
get into.
Yeah, we will. But I'm struck by this idea of moving to a different bank, and I'm thinking, whenever I've changed banks, one checking account, something's going to get screwed up, right? I change my account, one of my bills is not going to get paid. I know something's going to, and then you multiply that times 800, and just the administration of that is a substantial undertaking. So I think the point that Ms. Martinez raised, which I didn't quite hear your answer to, is there is going to be a substantial cost involved in doing this. Just in transferring accounts to another bank, forget about anything else. Just taking that action of moving 800 depository accounts and putting them in another institution. There's some substantial cost that's going to be borne by someone. And as I heard the question, it was under current law, under the current agreement, under the current RFP that produced that agreement, do we have any vehicle by which we can recapture those costs from Wells Fargo? Or will that have to be borne by the taxpayers?
I don't believe there is in the current agreement. I believe that going forward, if we were to engage with a new partner, that some of those costs would probably be borne or absorbed by the new financial institution. Of course, ultimately, those costs get passed back to us in some fashion. But there would be other third-party costs involved, such as if we are working with a third-party technology firm or something like that, those are unlikely to be absorbed directly by a financial institution, and probably costs that we would have to absorb on the city side, most likely.
Okay. So to kind of put a ribbon on that, if the council were to decide today that we wanted to transfer all of our accounts out of Wells Fargo. No. Wait, I said if. But no, please. No, we got to have order. No, I'm sorry, folks. We got to have order. I'm sorry. We're having a discussion. Thank you, but I'm not going to do that. I can't have the discussion of this committee be disrupted. I won't allow it. Thank you, but I can't allow it. If that were to happen, it would take many months, just to do that act.
Correct.
It would take as much as a year to go out to an RFP to find a bank capable of taking on that many accounts.
Correct.
Okay. So, and in the meantime, in order to ensure the integrity of those accounts, in order to ensure that taxpayer funds are protected, and in order to minimize the expense of that, presumably, we would go out, start now on developing a new RFP with new standards along the lines that are recommended, and maybe others as well, in order to find a replacement institution.
Correct, and we're well on our way in that, and we are in the process of incorporating and hope to incorporate any further changes that may come as a result of council action, whether it be with the RBO or with the items before us today.
Can any of that happen without exercising the final year of the Wells Fargo agreement?
No, I don't believe so. I don't know whether what Wells Fargo would be amenable to some sort of month-to-month sort of relationship, but I know that there are other contracts that we have that are fall under this umbrella that are much more specific, such as a letter of credit that we hold to support the city's small business assistance program, and those subcontracts do require us to have something in place in order to continue the line of credit. Otherwise, we risk losing the funds that are supporting the small business assistance program, and I believe it would become callable, and we would actually owe money as a result.
And
right, it's the same thing with our letter of credit.
And I assume it would be illegal, and if it is not illegal, it would certainly be ill-advised for us to go out and sole source this thing by finding some institution that we like and saying, here's all of Los Angeles' business, right? You would have to go through an RFP process. You have to go through a competitive bidding process to do that, or else it would,
correct.
I would hope that would be illegal, and if it's not illegal, it would certainly look very, very bad.
The treasurer has some limited authority to enter into agreements for depository services. However, the scope of services that the city has with Wells Fargo is very extensive. So it incorporates things well beyond depository services. It includes credit cards, and it includes armored car pickup and PCI compliance. And so it's so broad that I believe it extends beyond the purview of the treasurer to do so.
Okay. Okay. Members, anything else on, this is item number 15, right? Okay, so if I might suggest then, I would suggest that we approve the recommendations in the CAO's report, with recommendation 1 to be amended to instruct the Office of Finance and the Office of the CAO to include in the RFPs and agreements with banking and financial institutions a requirement that the institution disclose to the city any public enforcement action undertaken by any federal or state agency against the institution within 10 days after an action is taken or a fine is imposed, and disclose any public enforcement actions undertaken by local agencies annually. So that captures the collective reporting of the local, requirements that I mentioned before.
Also 10 days?
I'm sorry?
Also 10 days? The local agencies?
No. With the local agencies, the idea, disclose any public enforcement actions undertaken by local agencies annually. So that would be a collective report of all of the local reports. But the state and federal enforcement actions must be reported within 10 days, and then reported by the CAO and the Office of Finance to Council within 30 days after that. Right? That's consistent with the recommendations that you stated, right?
Yes.
Okay. Any objection or further discussion about that? All right.
Does this come back to the committee?
I did have a question on that.
Yeah, go ahead,
Since
Mr.
you
Inland.
said on the local annually, what would be an example of, so the regulatory environment is obviously state and federal. You talking about like county assessor, like what kind of local?
This is really kind of small potato stuff, but my concern is, think how many branches does Wells Fargo have in Los Angeles? A lot. Okay, some of those we might take building and safety enforcement actions against. We might, they might have non-compliance with, an ADA requirement for an access ramp or something that we might act on. Those are the sorts of things that I want to know about, but I don't need to know about them within 10 days. The state and federal things are banking regulatory.
Like some examples.
Yeah, it would be the sort of thing that we care about as a banking institution as opposed to just a storefront or, another property owner. Yes.
Well, and one of those things, let's say a minor issue like that, is not going to trigger the elimination of that or the contract forfeiture, right? But clearly, right? If it's a building and safety code on one branch in one place, it's not going to trigger any big.
No, not necessarily. But if we saw that there was, if we saw that there was a pattern across the country that they only. I can't think of an example offhand, but that they engaged in practices across the country that local governments were repeatedly citing them for. We'd want to know that.
We want to know that, and this gives us then the leverage to take action on that potentially.
Right. Right. Make sense? Yep. Okay. Any objection? Seeing no objection, it will be the action of the committee to approve the recommendations as amended on item number 15. Okay, and so that brings us to item number 14. Just in case there's questions, you guys might want to stick around. So on item number 14, members, any questions for staff? Ms. Martinez, did you have some additional questions that you wanted to cover?
This is 14?
On 14, yes. Mr. O'Farrell's main motion.
I did have a question of how do we define social responsibility? I think this is, many of the banks also invest in renewable energy and providing financing for affordable housing and other projects besides the Dakota Access Pipeline. I just want to define that. I think it gives us an opportunity to figure out whether that is, are we looking at a percentage, a strong financial number that would show us whether the bank is socially responsible? Have we thought about what that definition is?
So in terms of our RFP process, if that's particularly what you're looking at, we will provide some scoring factor in there for social or community responsibility. In terms of how that will be scored exactly, it's premature for me to say, but it's likely to include factors such as some of the things that will be identified when they submit their RFP or their bid, wherein they'd be identifying maybe some of the violations that have occurred. But we'd also be looking at things such as potentially like community investment. So kind of both sides of the coin in terms of what they're putting into the community, but also what are some of the things they may have done that have impinged on the community as well.
So okay.
I think our RBO as it exists has a lot of elements and information that it requires from the banks as well as CRA requirements that banks have to report on lending practices, participations in underrepresented communities. So there's a lot of quantifiable information that we could obtain from the banks where you could establish some determinations as how socially responsible and just how adequate is their participation in underrepresented communities, if that's one of your goals.
Mm-hmm. And have we looked at what the amount of other institutions have been that they've invested in the Dakota Access Pipeline? I know Wells Fargo's in the hot seat, but what other institutions have also invested in that project?
Offhand, I don't know. I know that there's quite a number of them. I believe it's in excess of a dozen or more. Many major financial institutions appear to be involved in some aspect of that.
Can you provide me with a list?
I'm sure we can get one.
I think that's it.
Mr. Bonner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. the testimony on this, I have a question, but the testimony on this was really fascinating. It reminded me of the beginning lines of Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the season of light, the season of darkness. Because there were two very different portraits painted, which in a way is appropriate. I support the motion, I was a second on it, but it was appropriate because this issue is both complex and simple, depending on how you look at it. The record of investment in this community by Wells Fargo was talked about in great detail. Some amazing things, probably better than any other bank in the city of Los Angeles. On the other hand, the stuff that we know about the predatory lending practices, the contribution and support for the Dakota Access Pipeline, which is one of the most egregious affronts to justice I can think of, is pretty jarring, and it's hard to reconcile those two things. And it's as you just detailed in the last item, is so complicated to figure out how really to extricate ourselves from the situation. Is there a way to extricate? I like the idea, because I appreciate Ms. Martinez's question about asking about the other banks. If we disinvest from Wells Fargo, where the hell do we go? Is there a better alternative? Because some of the other banks are just as bad, and we don't want to be putting our money in there. And it may be time we need to start looking at a municipally owned bank or something to that effect. But that's not the item today. But in lieu of that, it's a really wrenching choice, because in a year we're going to come back and the options are going to be not all that pleasant. So at a question about the RFP, because we talked about the social community responsibility component of the RFP, that would clearly, I think, by any objective standard, measure the type of things that we heard talked about from those who love Wells Fargo. The small businesses they've invested in, the minority-owned businesses they've invested in, the support for the LGBT community. It would certainly measure that. How does that measure things that we might find objectionable on a different level that aren't hyper-local, like investment in the Dakota Access Pipeline or in fossil fuels? How do we measure that in an RFP?
I don't believe in the past that it has been. I don't know if it's being contemplated here or not. I think what we were contemplating are things such as the CRA rating, and that is done by the OCC, which is the regulatory body, as well as other settlements or other actions that may have been taken against them by other regulatory bodies, and to have that information and use that as probably a good portion of the basis for the scoring of that section. So I don't believe at this point we were contemplating looking at the bank's own investments and where and how they invest those monies.
I'm not sure what the answer to my question was. I'm not being glib. I mean, I appreciate what you said. I'm just not sure how that applies. How would that give us the ability to evaluate someone's investments in DAPL, for instance?
Right. We weren't contemplating requesting that information as part of the RFP process. So we were not contemplating or have not contemplated looking at the investments of the banks that would be bidding on this contract.
And is that something we could do?
I think that it would be very difficult to do. We don't know, or we don't have parameters identified really in terms of what would or wouldn't be in consideration. I think one of the concerns that we would have is that, ultimately virtually all the banks that are likely to be competitive in this process are likely to be invested in things that may be found objectionable.
Yeah, I understand. That might be the case, but if a city like as big as Los Angeles starts making a statement about stuff like that, it begins to create some winds of change. I mean, I don't want to minimize what I said before about how complex this issue is and how difficult it is to do what I think a majority of this room and many of us up here want to do. It's so much harder than the hashtag. But you know, something is happening in this country. I mean, there are winds of change blowing. They certainly haven't made it to the nation's capital, but they're blowing. And I don't want them to stop here. So I'd like to see us be creative in thinking about how we can create a measure in an RFP to evaluate stuff such as this. I don't have the answers right now, but I do want us to think about that, and I'm sure there are plenty of ideas to do it. You know, because what we're contemplating is dual. I said it's complex and I said it's simple. It's the action part is complex. The statement part is, because it's also a statement, is the simple part. You know, it's which side are you on? And in a situation that gets messy and complex with competing priorities, you know, I think the right rule of thumb is who's vulnerable, who lacks institutional power, who has suffered injustice. And so that sides for, more than anyone in this country, the indigenous community, and supporting the intentions of Mr. O'Farrell's motion. I'm not sure where that leads us in terms of an action. I want to go where Mr. O'Farrell was pointing in the motion. I'm still a little murky on what steps we need to take to do that.
So Mr. Mona, the fact that you are wrestling with this the way you are, I think is reflective of just what you said about the complexity of this and how it's not, there is no simple way to do that, particularly when you're talking about investments of international or national organizations like this, which are, you know, across the board. And what we decide at any particular time, or what any future council decides, is an acceptable versus a non-acceptable investment for them to make is going to be a fluid process. And so evaluating that becomes problematic. But I will say that, to your point about making statements and the winds of change, there are many ways of making those statements too. And the motion that you and I introduced, for example, to have our city's utility become 100% based on renewable fuel is an example of that. And I heard many people here talking about the impacts of the petroleum industry, for example. The fact that the city is entirely divesting from coal in its generation of electricity is another way of making, not only making a statement, but having an absolute material impact, a direct and immediate impact on the state of the world. So I don't know that we need to encompass all of those goals in this, but the difficulty in doing that, I think you've pointed up very well.
I guess my question is, and it's a procedural one, is Mr. O'Farrell's option was asking for options for immediate divestment, recommendations for broker actions. Is that still something we're seeking, or did we just get that?
Well, no, we certainly have not gotten that. Right. And I think the import of Mr. O'Farrell's motion, as he wrote it and as he described it again here too, was to take a deep look at all of the complexities that you're talking about in order to have that strategy. And in our discussions with him about, you know, the objectives and what he's wanted to achieve, I actually, in chatting with him, have some recommendations for actions that we can take, which I'm happy to offer now. But let's go first with Mr. Blumenfield.
Okay. And I like where the conversation is headed. I'm struggling with the same issue. I Googled the different banks that have been at Standing Rock, for example, and it's every major bank. I mean, you read the list. It's Citibank, Comerica, U.S. Bank, Barclays, J.P. Morgan Chase, Deutsche Bank, UBS. Morgan Stanley. I mean, so my fear, of course, is...
Please, folks, you can't shut out. And there isn't a credit union that can take 800 city accounts tomorrow. So these are the sorts of things that we'd have to begin looking at. But please don't interrupt the members as they're speaking.
So there's the practicality, and you know, how do we get to a place where we can have ethical banking practices? And that's what we're all pushing for. And the responsible banking ordinance, which is more of a reporting requirement, is great, and that tells us how many loans, and that's part of the equation. The Community Reinvestment Act gives us another set of information, but none of it gets to the question of investments, of where these, you know, and how that plays into the analysis of who we do business with. So maybe down the road we need to figure out our own Community Reinvestment Act for LA and have a separate board or something that looks at different companies that we do business with in banking and other major, you know, areas, and gives them a rating of some sort. And then that factors into some of these decisions in a systematic and objective way. Because absent doing something like that, it's very difficult to take, you know, just unilateral action on one, and then I'll fall into a situation where we're potentially in a worse spot. So again, I'm struggling with the same complexities here. Want to get us to a point of investing in ethical banking practices and all of those good things, and want to make sure that we're looking not only at Wells Fargo but about any institution that is engaged in unethical behavior. So I mean, I like the idea of broadening it, and I like the idea of this RFP process, but I'd love to see it expanded to incorporate this investment question in a more systematic way. And I don't know the answer to it, but maybe it is getting a panel of folks to create a grading system that can be a factor in these decisions. Because if we just do it based on the objective factors that we've put forward, then a lot of the issues that people are concerned about are not going to be considered.
Yeah, Ms. Martinez.
I forgot about this earlier. I want to talk a little bit about unbundling the services, and that we're not just giving all of our services to one institution, especially so that it doesn't get too big. Can you talk a little bit about how, if we were to break it up, how does this look? What does it look like, and how does this impact our services?
Sure.
Because last time we awarded this contract, we awarded it to two different banks.
Correct.
Wells Fargo ended up buying the second bank, and that's how they became the sole service provider. So how does that look? What does that look like if we were to unbundle the services?
Right. Like I was mentioning earlier, right now what we have with Wells Fargo is pretty much all-encompassing just about every financial service that you could think of. What we are looking to do going forward is to be a little bit more focused on some of the core depository services, basically the moving in and out of monies, lockbox services, and to decouple things such as our merchant services, our PCI services, potentially armored car services as well, so that we're dealing with different institutions rather than all going through one institution. Potentially, depending on kind of how things transpire, potentially even looking at having more than one depository or elements of depository services with banks. And so hopefully in the future we wouldn't have every service tied to one particular institution, but we would want to identify kind of a combination of who provides the best services for the best price points and meet all of our requirements and are sort of best of class in the various areas. And so that will likely take us in a few different directions. We've already been able to do a little bit of that for certain specific services where we were able to take advantage of some cooperative agreements, such as one we're doing now where we're implementing a new payment program with Union Bank. And so there are some small pieces that we've been able to begin to...
Mr. Chair, can I ask that we get details on what types of services and the costs associated with each service so that we can get a clear picture of how much this contract is actually worth?
Sure.
In addition, I also want to look at the dollar amount associated with the deposits that the city makes and how it can help smaller institutions determine whether they can handle the volume of money as well.
We do break it down a little bit on item number 7 on the third page of the report.
I know, I keep going back between 15, 7,
Sorry about
and
that.
14. It's my fault. I
But-
think it's all encompasses the
But
same thing anyway.
we do break it down by, under that particular agreement, how the money's split out. And we can certainly break it down in further or different detail. If you like, we can follow up and find out, what you'd like to see exactly. But you can see here, in terms of the banking services under Wells Fargo, and this is estimated amounts for this year, it's about $3.9 million in costs to the city, and then about another $3.9 million in merchant processing costs to the city via Wells Fargo. Elevon, which is a merchant services provider under the Wells Fargo contract, is estimated about $9.8 million. And then we have much lesser amounts for armored courier services and for PCI validation services also under the same agreement.
Okay.
One thing I think I could also add is that the current financial environment is much different than it was
In 2008?
in 2008 or a little before that when the RFP was being crafted and pondered. And so the business model that was proposed then for the contractual relationship between the city and its banks is not going to serve the city very well in this process. So we are going to move away from that model of bundling all the services in one contractual bank agreement, and we're now working toward unbundling those as best we can. But we certainly can tell you that business model is not going to serve us very well going forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
For one thing, we've learned since 2008 of the consequences of institutions being too big to fail, and that applies, I think, equally with our services as well. I think it's a really good point. We should definitely get that report back here, as Ms. Martinez just requested. I would recognize there's probably cost efficiencies in dealing with fewer institutions, and it's easier for administration, but you eliminate, so a few people mentioned credit unions, for example. You by bundling it that many services with that large of a contract, you effectively eliminate, all of the community banks and, credit unions and other smaller institutions that just can't compete with the national institutions to provide those sorts of services. They don't have the capacity to be able to do it. And I think not only the city would be better served, but the local economy would be better served if we were able to diversify some of those services among a number of different vendors. So, and that's true, by the way, without any finding of fault with any particular institution. I just think, as a matter of good economics, it's a good idea to diversify. Anyway, so that report, I think, back would be helpful. So if I may, go ahead, Mr. Bonner.
Just a couple more questions. As I'm sitting here thinking, I'm also, having spoken about the complexity of it, I'm worried about getting hypnotized by the complexity at the same time. And other cities have done this. So I'm just curious, have we looked at what they did and why it wasn't as complex for them?
I think I have looked at what others have done, and I think in different locations, divestment has meant a little bit different thing, and it sort of depends on the nature of services that they're receiving and the extent of their relationships that they have. Not everyone is obviously using Wells Fargo for general banking services. Not everyone is in a situation where they're only relying on one bank, et cetera. So there's different aspects to it also in terms of the various avenues that they're looking at. It might be general banking services, it might be the investment portfolio, it might be the investment banking services that are being provided. So here we're mostly focusing on the RFP for general banking services, but there are others such as Santa Monica that said, okay, we're not going to invest in Wells Fargo anymore, and for that matter, I'll say that we haven't purchased any Wells Fargo as part of our own investment portfolio since this news broke ourselves. There are others who have investment banking services being provided by Wells Fargo, such as State of California. State of California suspended the investment banking services with Wells Fargo, but it's a different nature than the general banking services. In investment banking, they can, once the deals are done, they can always enter into a new deal, a new bank for a new deal. The general banking services piece of it is a little bit more operationally challenging to move. And those that have focused on that piece, they've tended to say, to be kind of future focused and say, okay, we know we need to maintain business continuity, but at the same time, we're going to put some things into place to try and control the situation or make sure this sort of thing doesn't happen again.
So, as we go forward, Mr. Chairman, assuming we're asking for options and recommendations back, I'd like to get more information on the specifics of what the other cities did and didn't do, and how fast they were able to do them. The one thing I just want to be sensitive to as we go forward is, I want to phrase this delicately, I want to be sensitive to sort of our own institutional biases. I come to every decision with a bias. I'm a white guy. My perspective on the world is different than Ms. Martinez's. And we represent different communities, and our viewpoint on stuff is shaped by the people that we spend our time with. And so those of us in the city who spend all of our time dealing with institutions of finance are going to just have absorbed some of that perspective about the complexity of this, the difficulty of this, and I just want us to be sensitive to that and try to drive through that and see if there is a way to sort of work through our biases and figure out a way that we can get to disinvestment. I know that's easier said, actually it wasn't that easy to say. I'm not sure it came out that well, so maybe it's not easier said than done. But it's just something I think we need to be sensitive to. I mean, there's certainly a perception in this country, in both parties, that there's a rigged system owned by financial institutions. And I think we need to ask ourselves, are we sort of buying into that mindset that dictates that this is as complex as it is? So what I just asked, Mr. Chair, is what I was saying before is that if we're asking for options and recommendations, as Mr. O'Farrell asked for in his motion, if we can get some information on what the other cities did and how they worked through these challenges and what they did was different.
Absolutely. All right. I think that's certainly helpful. I never believe in reinventing the wheel if we don't have to. But I think where we're at, and in speaking with Mr. O'Farrell and where we're at, it seems, you mentioned a tale of two cities, and the two opposite statements of it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, were both true. And I think some of that we've seen today too. It is true that Wells Fargo has done a tremendous amount by investing in a lot of our organizations. It's also true that a segment within that institution committed a massive fraud on a lot of people, and at great cost. And it's those two things can both exist as true statements at the same time. And I think, to your point, Mr. Bonin, our task is to figure out a way to evaluate this institution, but any other institution that we would do business with, in a way that kind of eliminates our own biases from that process. And that's what this RFP process should be about. It should be about us setting clear standards, based on our values, taxpayer interests, the local economy's interests, setting those out as clearly as we can, and having a fair grading process that, comes to a conclusion free of our biases. And that's not going to happen within a week or a month. But I think we do need to engage in that process. And I think the discussion that Mr. O'Farrell and I have had demonstrates we have to have a much deeper body of information upon which to base a future RFP, or the current RFP, and do that kind of analysis, exactly what you're talking about, and the sort of thing that Ms. Martinez requested as well. So I'd like to make a suggestion and see what you all think about it. So based on the motion, I would recommend that we instruct the Office of Finance to develop a new request for proposal for the city's general banking services and report to council before releasing the RFP. The RFP should consider the following criteria for any financial institution seeking to do business with the city. A, the financial institution's Community Reinvestment Act score. B, any recent regulatory enforcement actions against the financial institution. And C, the financial institution's compliance with the terms of the city's responsible banking ordinance. Number 2, I would recommend that we instruct the Office of Finance to report on its purchase and broker transactions with Wells Fargo Bank and the impacts of its suspending its investment activities with Wells Fargo until it improves its Community Reinvestment Act score to at least satisfactory. And number 3, I would recommend that we request that the city attorney report on whether the city may discontinue business with Wells Fargo on the basis of its Community Reinvestment Act score, and whether Wells Fargo may be disqualified from or penalized in a competitive bid because of that score or recent regulatory actions related to the Wells Fargo fraudulent account scandal. So with these recommendations, we would, and then the additional information requested by Ms. Martinez and Mr. Bonin as to other cities and as to diversification of banking services among a variety of contractors. So those would be the things that would come back here and to council for further consideration before any RFP is released, so that we can further shape it to determine some of the trickier questions about social equity and some of the other things that we're struggling with today. Come back with that report, and then we'll have an opportunity to review the RFP before it's issued.
Question?
Yeah.
Does the scope of that encompass, there were two things in the motion. I just want to make sure that the scope of what you're asking for encompasses asking for options for divestment and recommendations for broker actions for triggering reinvestment.
This is pursuant to a discussion with Mr. O'Farrell, and he agrees with these things. I think the part about broker action, I was a little unclear exactly what that language in the motion meant. That's why I recrafted it the way that we did. And again, this is with his approval. And then I think the other element of that is getting the city attorney's advice back in as to what the range of options may be.
That's how I understood the city attorney direction. I was just clarifying.
Yeah. So. Ms. Martinez.
Just reiterate that I really think we need to look at how we quantify social responsibility. So I don't know if it's in this item 14 that we talk about it, or do I incorporate it in item 7? I just want to make sure that I think we need to quantify what that means.
Right.
I don't know if we do it in this item, or do I wait and talk about it in
It's more relevant to this
7.
item, I would say, than number 7, because number 7 is just renewal of the existing contract.
How do we define social responsibility?
I think we're still crafting that, but I think some of the elements like that Councilman Krikorian just outlined would be extremely pertinent to that in terms of what other agencies are out there that regulate. What have they found? How have they rated them in terms of the CRA? So trying to get those quantifiable measures can be a little bit tricky. So we do have to rely on what's out there and what exists already. And I think another portion of that is going to be what are they transmitting in terms of the RBO, all the myriad information that's being requested there in terms of the types of loans they're making and the types of investments they're making in the community. And then we would assign that portion of, we would assign a score to that portion of the RFP, along with looking at other things such as experience and other elements as well.
So one of the challenges we had with the RBO when we wrote it was trying to deal with any disparity there may be in reporting requirements between what we were asking for and what state regulators, federal regulators, and other states and others might be asking for. Because if you don't have uniform information, you can't realistically compare one institution to the other. And so we wrestled with that very issue. I think that will be important if we pursue that kind of an element in an RFP to use some, whatever it is, some identifiable uniform standard. So that's one of the reasons that I had suggested the Community Reinvestment Act score, which deals with a number of different issues, ranks them, and so forth. That's existing. We already know how to deal with it. In some respects, Wells Fargo, by example, has gotten good scores. In some, not satisfactory scores under that. So that's a body of information that we know how to use and that other government entities know how to use. But I would also ask that as you look at what other cities have done in terms of divestment or other actions with regard to financial institutions, that if they add on to that or if they approach things a different way, I think we would like to know that as well, so we can determine whether there's some balance between uniformity and thoroughness that we may want to strike that might be different than the CRA.
Sure.
Mr. Bloomfield.
Related to that, and I was talking about this earlier, I don't know if there's a way to create, because we're a big enough city, we don't necessarily have to just rely on these external scores. We could set up our own commission or some group of evaluators that would look at a series of factors and come up with our own score that could be factored in as well, which might take into account things that we care about that would not be reflected on these other scores. So maybe we could add in an option just for them to bring back options of creating our own ethical scoring system.
As part of this report back?
As part of this report back. I don't know exactly what, I have some ideas of what that could look like. And maybe we have to rely on the external Community Reinvestment Act. But all of these are basically ceding that moral authority to other organizations or levels of government that are evaluating it. But I don't want to preclude the possibility that we, on the city level, could create our own evaluation.
Okay. So when the report comes back, perhaps an analysis of feasibility, benefits, costs, and so on of a separate city evaluation mechanism that would be in addition to or instead of the factors that we've outlined, or the ranking systems that we've outlined.
Imagine being one piece of it, but that's for future consideration.
Okay. All right. Anything else, members? Any other questions or comments on that?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just for clarification.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry, Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams has been studiously taking notes, but...
I do.
No, let's try and do it. Let's try and do it.
I just want to make sure I understand. The recommendations that the committee is proposing, or the amendments the committee is proposing, are in lieu of those in the motion or in addition to?
These are in lieu of.
Okay.
So.
And then the recommendation...
It's not fair to say in lieu of, because these were in consultation with the author. They're intended to capture what the motion is intended to do. But yes, it's as we've drafted them here.
Okay. And then the amendments are for, as one requested by Councilmember Martinez, is additional details, Office of Finance reporting back with additional details of services and costs of services and the amounts associated with deposits that the city makes in order to basically assist small businesses in determining if they can accommodate the city's business.
Fair. Okay.
Requests from Councilmember Bonin regarding more specifics on what other cities have done in terms of disinvestment and how they work through those challenges. Your recommendations, Mr. Chair, regarding instructions from Office of Finance regarding developing a new RFP for general banking services, and a report to council before releasing that RFP, and including information regarding community investment scores, actions, any sort of action taken against that institution, compliance with the responsible banking ordinance, office finance report on purchasing services and broker services, request for the city attorney to report back on city disinvestment based on Community Investment Act scores. And then also, I believe Councilmember Martinez is requesting information regarding how we define social responsibility. Councilmember Blumenfeld is requesting report back regarding options for creating the city's own scoring system and a body for doing so regarding community investment scoring. And
The only thing I think that maybe was left out was the request for advice from the city attorney regarding discontinuance of business with Wells Fargo or disqualification from or penalties in the competitive bid process. But I've written all that out, so you don't need to take notes. I'll just give you my notes. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think so. All right. Anything else, members? Are there any objections to proceeding with the recommendations as we've all collectively included? Mr. Williams' recap just tried to list and pursuing those recommendations. I see no objections, so it will be the action of the committee to proceed as follows and to recommend those actions to the City Council. All right. Thank you all very much. Thank you for your participation. We do have some more business to attend to. As folks are exiting, I would ask you to keep the volume down a little bit because we do still have more business to do. Oh, I'm sorry. We didn't do item number 7. Item number 7 was just recommend approval of that item so that we can proceed with the final year. Is there any objection to that? Seeing none, that will be the action of the committee. Did we vote on item 15? We did.
Yes, we did, sir.
Okay, so that then brings up item number...
we still have 6 and 16.
6 and 16. So we'll bring up item number 6 first. Do we still have staff on item number 6?
Yes, staff is coming.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate what you're doing.
All right.
You're representing the community very well.
Thank you. All right. Now again, folks, if I can please ask you to try to keep the volume down as you exit because we do still have additional items. Item number 6.
Item number 6 is motion Blumenfield for Krikorian O'Farrell relative to authorization for transfer and appropriation of funding to the Department of General Services for various ADA and improvement projects and for various Los Angeles World Airport projects.
Thank you for your patience. Sorry about that. Couldn't be avoided. Go right ahead.
So per their motion, Anastasia Tarpe Ellis with the City Administrative Officer.
Rose Karagizian with General Services.
The motion was presented by the chair. We recommend that item 1, which is to authorize the transfer of $2.9 million from GSD's revenue source to GSD budgetary accounts, be recommended. We also recommend that item 2 of the motion be eliminated for a loan for $1 billion from the reserve fund to the UB, and also to keep item 3 of the motion.
Okay, so the recommendation, members, on item number 6 is to retain item 1 and 3, requests number 1 and 3 in the motion, and to defer item 2. So that would be my recommendation as well. If there's any questions on this matter or concerns, I'm very sorry. It should have been consent, but anyway, so it will be the action of the committee then to approve instructions 1 and 3 and advance the item to council. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that brings up item 16, which would have been consent, but I did have a card on it from Matt Harper. Is Mr. Harper still here? All right. Since Mr. Harper is not here, his card will be noted, and item number 16, members, the recommendation is to approve the item. Is there any questions or concerns about it? Seeing none, that will be the action of the committee to approve the item. Thank you. Sorry, appreciate your patience. All right. So that, I think, was our final item of business. Is there anything else before the committee?
No, sir, that clears
You
it.
good? Okay. All right, there being no other items before the committee, we are adjourned.